and to ensure the integrity of the case remains maintained. The culmination of that cooperation ultimately led to take the suspect into custody and afforded the families some sense of peace they deserve. I want to thank the Moscow Police Department, the Idaho State Police, and our partners in the Federal Bureau of Investigation for their support, assistance, and coordination. I also want to recognize the Monroe County District Attorney's Office. And finally, I need to acknowledge the members of the Pennsylvania State Police, specifically members of Troop N, our Bureau of Criminal Investigation, and our Bureau of Emergency and Special Operations, who assisted in safely taking the suspect into custody in the early morning hours of December 30th. As previously indicated by Chief James Fry of the Moscow Police Department, specific details regarding this investigation cannot be released until the suspect is extradited to Idaho and presented with the probable cause affidavit. At this time, I will turn the microphone over to Major Christopher Paris, Commander of Area 3, who was involved in the coordinated efforts to take the suspect into custody.
Thank you, Colonel. Area 3 comprises Troops F, P, N, and R, and is made up of 1,000 approximately of the women and men, civilian and enlisted, in the northeastern part of Pennsylvania. I'd like to introduce to my left Captain Norm Kramer, who's the commander of Troop N Hazleton, which is comprised of Carbon, Monroe, Columbia, and parts of Luzerne counties. I would like to reiterate, as the colonel said, that Idaho law prohibits any release of information contained within the affidavits. So we're going to do our best today to talk about what phase we are currently in the investigation, and it has entered a new phase with the waiver for extradition. And the continuing primary goal is the seeking of justice through successful prosecution and conviction, bearing the burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. So with that in mind, we're trying to balance essentially two things: the public's desire for information against the need to maintain the integrity of the investigation and protect the suspects, accused at this point's due process. So I'll now attempt to give you an operational picture with the best information I can release at the time. So this begins when the Pennsylvania State Police Bureau of Criminal Investigation troopers were contacted by the FBI about assisting with surveillance of the accused in this case. I'd like to take the opportunity to specifically thank several individuals. Special Agent in Charge Jackie McGuire and Assistant Special Agent in Charge Dave Carter from the Philadelphia Field Division, as well as Supervisory Special Agent Bill Vigorito of the Scranton RA. We're very lucky in PSP to have a collaborative relationship with the Bureau, both in Pennsylvania and beyond, and their people are absolutely excellent. So as the investigation progressed, Troop N Criminal Investigation Section, commanded by Captain Kramer over my left shoulder here, began to collaborate with authorities in Idaho. Specifically, I'd like to acknowledge Lieutenant James Curto, who is here today, Sergeant Anthony Ferdinand, Corporal John Chulak, who is not present with us, and Troopers Leary and Knoll, who are here with us today. It was through this collaboration and the charges pending in Idaho that those troopers were able to obtain search warrants and a fugitive from justice warrant that was prepared here in Monroe County for the location in Chestnut Hill Township and the fugitive from justice warrant for Mr. Koberger, respectively. I'd like to acknowledge the Monroe County District Attorney, David Christine, as well as First Assistant Mike Mancuso and their entire office. The support that we received was absolutely excellent. Once those warrants were obtained, the Bureau of Emergency and Special Operations, BESO, coordinates our Special Emergency Response Team, CERT. They were selected to serve those warrants, the 3 search warrants and the fugitive from justice warrant. To define what CERT is, it's a full-time tactical team maintained by PSP to deal with high-risk warrant situations, barricades, and other incidents requiring specialized tactical training or other capabilities. From their perspective, we essentially task them to go out and serve a arrest warrant for someone accused of a quadruple murder. They're activated several hundred times a year throughout the Commonwealth. We don't typically hear of their work in a forum like this because they serve the warrant, the person's taken into custody, and they go about their assignment. They are the ultimate professionals. It's a volunteer team. They're highly trained and highly motivated. Captain Norm Kramer, over my left shoulder, was assigned as the top comm for the CERT activation, which means he was responsible for coordinating our tactical preparations. So tactical assets were then staged in the county, in Monroe County, into the evening of Thursday, December 29th, last Thursday. And in the early hours of Friday, December 30th, those warrants were executed at the location. Mr. Koberger was taken into custody without incident. The scene was turned over to the FBI Evidence Response Team for processing. Mr. Koberger was then turned over to the Monroe County Prison, where he has remained in their custody since. I'd like to thank the Monroe County Sheriff and the Stroud Regional Police Department for their support as well during the extradition process. Arrangements currently are being made to deliver Koberger back to Idaho, where he can have continued due process and face these charges. So it's with that I will turn it over to First Assistant Mike Mancuso.
Thank you, Major. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Mike Mancuso with the DA's office, the First Assistant District Attorney. I want to give my condolences to the families of the victims out in Idaho for their loss. It's my sincere hope that this marks a clear step in the right direction of effectuating justice for those folks. My office's role was relatively recent. We weren't advised of the presence of the defendant in our county until only a couple days before the apprehension of the defendant. But when we were told, we came together and worked very closely with Captain Kramer, who did an excellent job in almost like a clockwork operation. Part of my duties were to ensure that 3 separate search warrants were issued. Those affidavits attached to those search warrants are still under seal, so I can't discuss their contents with you. But one was for the person of Mr. Koberger, collecting DNA and photographs, that sort of thing. One was for the white Elantra vehicle, which I understand has been seized and is being processed. And one was for the address, the residence itself that he was living in with his family. I was at the scene, and I have to say that Major Paris and Captain Norm Kramer did an outstanding job in coordinating the efforts, not only of the numerous Pennsylvania State police troopers there, but officers from other jurisdictions and disciplines within those jurisdictions to make this a very smooth, highly competent professional operation. It is a quirk, apparently. It's not in the norm of the states I'm familiar with that Idaho does not release their probable cause affidavit in support of their arrest warrant until after their defendant is returned to that state. But having read those documents and the sealed affidavits of probable cause, I definitely believe that one of the main reasons the defendant chose to waive extradition and hurry his return back to Idaho was the need to know what was in those documents. So that's a significant development. Beyond that, looking at the scope of the situation and the ties this defendant has to my county, I would hold our office at the disposal of the Idaho authorities to help facilitate a complete background investigation into the defendant, both activities prior to the murders occurring within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and his activities after the murders in Pennsylvania. So we stand ready to assist with that effort on an ongoing basis. Thank you.
We can now open it up for questions.
Can you tell us what state police specifically did, or can you give us any indication as to the operations of state police when you were notified? And you talk about putting tactical in the area. How long were they there? And what's the...
We're not in a position to give you an exact time. It was at some point prior to when the surveillance was taken as the investigation progressed to a point where search warrants could be obtained and the probable cause for those search warrants and an arrest warrant, a fugitive from justice warrant based on the arrest warrant out in Idaho were obtained. We began to take the tactical steps to plan to serve them.
Were Were you collecting evidence prior to his arrest?
At this point, like we said, it's very much pertinent to what's in the affidavits, which we cannot speak about.
What's it about his demeanor when the arrest actually happened?
Present sense impression, as likewise ongoing investigation, can't discuss it.
How, Rob Mann, 69 News, how is Koberger being transported back to Idaho?
Those arrangements are being discussed right now, as well as the logistics. The court order says, those of you who heard it today, it's within the next 10 days, so we're currently working on that in coordination with authorities out in Idaho. Sir? I can't comment, I don't know.
Is he being held in the Monroe County Jail until he's extradited, or is he removed to another?
No, he is lodged in since he was dropped off there Friday morning, he's resided in Monroe County Prison.
Still, and until he's
Correct, yes.
extradited, he'll be there?
Are the marshals moving him, or which group is
At this
moving
point, that's still being coordinated between the state police and the authorities out there. We don't know.
Will the affidavit be unsealed when he arrives in Idaho?
I don't want to speak out of my lane. When I watched the press conference on Friday at 1 p.m. Pacific time, I was alerted to the fact that according to Idaho state law, that the affidavits have to be served to him once he's extradited back before they could be unsealed.
Did he say, has anyone else been arrested?
Ongoing investigation, ma'am.
Has a motive been determined?
I can't comment on that either. I apologize.
Who transports him, sir? Does Pennsylvania State Police, the Monroe County Sheriff's Department?
He's presently back. He was transported from the courthouse by Monroe County Sheriff. And the logistics of who's going to transport him out to Idaho are still being discussed. We don't know yet.
Can you confirm the time of his arrest and how much law enforcement presence there actually was?
I would say it was in the early morning hours of Friday, December 30th. Tactical assets on scene were probably in the neighborhood of 50.
Were you afraid he was going to get tipped off before you got him?
I would say overall about this entire operation, and the credit goes, this is a part that the state police played humbly. You look at Moscow Police Department, 38 sworn, 19,000 leads, the video evidence that they had to develop in order to put that out, all public source information. But when you talk about the service of a high-risk warrant for someone who's committed or alleged to have committed 4 homicides, there's nothing routine about that. And all of those tactical steps that were taken were in conjunction with the best efforts of the authorities, local, state, and federal, both in Idaho and here, to ensure that we could do it safely and to ensure that we could get him into custody and that those service or the search warrants could occur.
Sir, can we ask you a question of the first assistant district attorney? Mr. Mancuso, you described having read to a degree the contents of that affidavit of probable cause, and that you possibly speculated or theorized that he wanted to get back to read that as well, since he can't read that. Can you give us an indication, though, of the seriousness of what you did read? I know you can't talk about it, but can you share with us something?
Yeah, I can't get into the details, sir, but I can say it involved the defendant's connection to a scene of a crime consisting of 4 murdered people. So that's the significance of it.
Can you confirm that there is a connection between Ryan Koberger and any of the victims?
I can't discuss that, ma'am.
How confident are you that he is guilty of his crimes?
That wouldn't be my place to say. Certainly confident enough that there was ample probable cause for the issuance of the various warrants in the case.
What was your reaction when you heard this? You've all talked about, you followed this. This happened states away. When you get that call, or you all get the call, that this person could be right here in your home area, what's your reaction?
Well, I was surprised, really, Monroe County of all places. It hits close to home. It's a normal human reaction, I would think, under the circumstances.
Do you know when he and his father left Idaho or Washington and drove to Pennsylvania, what that date was?
No, I don't know the exact date, ma'am.
Approximately, we understand the middle of December, is that correct?
I think that's approximate.
And what about, we had heard reports that they were stopped not once but twice on the highway. Can you elaborate?
I'll defer to his Pennsylvania public defender on that.
Do you have reason to believe that Koberger is connected to other crimes and unsolved mysteries in the area?
I wouldn't answer that question at this time.
We start looking at some that may be unsolved where he was around.
That would be a normal thing to do.
Question for the PSP here. Said he was taken without incident. Was it safe to say that I shouldn't say it's safe to say, but did it seem like he was expecting?
I wouldn't comment on what his present sense was. I would just comment that the professionalism of the CERT team and their tactical training definitely proved in a situation like this to do it in the most tactically sound and fastest way possible.
Was there anybody else in the house at the time?
Yes, parents were in the house at the time.
Did they say anything to you?
Again, present sense impression, I can't comment on that, ongoing investigation.
You break down the door?
Force was used. The warrants were issued for evening search warrants, which in Pennsylvania requires additional probable cause in order to serve them at the hours of darkness. I would defer to the first assistant to talk about the legal burden that you bear in order to obtain those, but from a tactical standpoint, based upon all of the briefings that we had developed and all of the intelligence we had developed, we thought that was the best time to serve it.
And what tipped off that Pennsylvania was involved with this?
We were alerted by the FBI. Troopers in the Bureau of Criminal Investigation were alerted.
Anything on like his social media pages that tipped anything?
I can't comment. I don't know.
So has your parents been cooperative in this whole process?
Can't comment. Ongoing, like I said. The state police's role here was to serve the warrants and assist with the surveillance, which we've done. We've been part of major investigations. You know, these are men and women who take an oath to protect their communities and the Commonwealth here. We're very humbled with the opportunity that we had, given a case that has really gained international attention, to play a small part in it. And our hat is off to Moscow PD, again, with the size and the complexity of this investigation and the work that they've done to get us here today. And this is only the beginning of the next step.
If it's determined that anyone here in Pennsylvania either helped to conceal or dispose of any evidence, then you would be a part of this case, or would it go to...
I would say that we would pledge whatever support we can for ongoing investigations with the Idaho authorities here in Pennsylvania. Absolutely, we would help them in any way we could.
Were there any weapons found in the home?
I don't want to get into what was actually seized in the house pursuant to the evidentiary nature of it.
Can you give any insight into why you all decided to go in overnight to make the arrest?
Those are tactical decisions in terms of base surveillance. I don't want to give out too many tactical factors that go into that situation, but obviously surveillance was conducted and we wanted to go in at a time when we thought it would be the safest for everybody, safest for anybody else in the house, safest for Mr. Koberger, and safest for our people.
There was an interesting question asked earlier about the care that needed to be taken to not tip the suspect off. Could you describe how long that lid had to be on things and how many people were involved in it? Like how many people knew and for how long?
So I would say, I would answer the question this way. I don't want to get into a timeline in terms of when we were notified by the FBI and when the surveillance began. Obviously, we know on Thursday night into Friday morning is when the warrants were served. I would say, as a credit to the professionals, both standing behind me and others not here, many others not here, the information was held very close. And we did not want to have any situation where Mr. Koberger potentially would be tipped off. So as a result of that, I would say a close number of approximately 7 to 8 individuals, maybe 10 on the most within the PSP side of this operation knew about it.
And for days, can we say? Or?
I would say for a period of time. I would not feel comfortable commenting any more than that, for a period of time. And then as the tactical assets were brought in, people were briefed.
When the movement plan is finally decided, will there be an announcement? Will
not from the state police. We would defer to Moscow and the authorities in Idaho.
When he starts leaving Pennsylvania?
Well, we have security concerns now, obviously, to move any prisoner. Anytime you move somebody from a secure prison to another place, we don't want to. There won't be an announcement from the state police in terms of those logistics, but they're being worked on right now.
Can you give us your best guess when you think he might be moved, roughly? Tomorrow?
We would like to do it as soon as possible, but the court order says 10 days. We have 10 days to coordinate it.
Can you potentially be on a plane tonight? Is it possible he could be on a plane tonight? That's a possibility, right?
I can't. I would think that's probably not likely.
A private plane, or would you fly commercially?
We're looking into that right now.
Can you confirm or deny that a window was broken in order to gain access into the home?
There were multiple windows that were broken, I believe, to gain access, as well as multiple doors. I think the video of the house after the fact confirms that, and that would all be part of the tactical plan based on the floor plan of the house, et cetera, and what the CERT operators would do to serve those warrants.
Was this suspect on your radar before, and are you looking at any connections?
I wouldn't comment on that based on the ongoing nature.
But how about Did he have a criminal past? According to the UJS, I didn't see anything.
I can't comment on a person's criminal history during an ongoing investigation.
Sorry, Mr. Mancuso said that you stand ready to assist in giving a complete background of the defendant. What specifically is law enforcement interested in?
That'll be the last question after Mr. Mancuso answers.
In any case of this nature, and I prosecuted a fair share of homicides, double homicides, that sort of thing, you want to look at any evidence of possible motive. You want to look at any evidence of a pattern, of modus operandi or method. You want to get into the subject's character, mental state to the best you can, that sort of thing. So it'll be an all-encompassing effort, which we stand ready for. Okay.
How will you do it?
We have our ways. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Spelling. I'll give everyone the spelling of everyone's name. It was included in the media advisory, but
You're just listening in there to Monroe County, Pennsylvania police. They're detailing the arrest and the extradition orders that were issued by a judge there in this Idaho murder suspect, Brian Kohberger. As we saw him in the courtroom today, he was expected to waive, and he did waive those extraditing hearing, so he will be on his way back to Idaho within the next 10 days or so. So we're following this very closely here on Live Now from Fox. This was the scene from earlier as he left the courtroom, and you heard the police there detailing just how the arrest was made. As they said, it was held close to their chest, a lot of information about this potential suspect over a period of time. They did not want to disclose how long they knew about this, but they also said they used force potentially to get into the Kohberger home, where his parents were also at home when they made this arrest in Monroe County. Of course, there was, I believe, quite a few dozen officials on hand for that arrest, so it was a high-profile arrest, a high-risk arrest there in Monroe County. And they said he would be heading back to Idaho within the next 10 or so days. That's according to the judge's rule. So we're following this very closely here on Live Now from Fox, as you just watched it live, raw, and unfiltered. To give more of a context of what happened today and what will happen over the next 10 or so days, here's more from our Fox affiliate on that.
This afternoon, the suspected Idaho killer wearing an orange jumpsuit and shackles walks into this Pennsylvania courthouse. It's the first time we've seen him in person. Brian Kohberger waived his extradition, so he will be taken by U.S. Marshals back to Idaho. There, he faces 4 counts of first-degree murder and a felony burglary charge. The 28-year-old arrested Friday in Monroe County, Pennsylvania. Sources tell me investigators linked him to the killings by matching crime scene DNA with a sample that had been sent by one of his family members to a genealogy website.
If we have enough data, if we have enough cousins, enough matches, we can eventually narrow it down to just one family and often just one individual.
Kohberger's attorney says his client is eager to be cleared of these charges.
They've already stopped the Idaho police from tearing down the crime scene so that they could have their own experts come in.
Investigators now working to learn more about the suspect. Kohberger was a student at Washington State. He was studying to get his PhD in criminal justice and criminology. The university is only about a 10-minute drive from the murder scene. Then, over Christmas break, investigators say Kohberger drove with his dad back to Pennsylvania in that white Hyundai Elantra that detectives had been searching for. They were stopped by state troopers twice in Indiana for minor traffic offenses, but didn't get a ticket. Once Kohberger leaves Pennsylvania, the U.S. Marshals will take him back to Moscow, Idaho, and that's when we'll learn those new details about the murders. Reporting in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, I'm Alexis McAdams, Fox News.
Back into Live and Now from Fox, I am Andy Mack. This was the scene just moments ago out of Monroe County as Brian Kohberger was out of the courtroom in this extradition hearing, and certainly following this one as he faces those 4 counts of first-degree murder back in Moscow, Idaho, and could be back in Idaho in the coming days. To hear more about this and what this hearing means, we're going to be joined now by Brian Silber, a former prosecutor. Thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. First and foremost, what can you tell us about what this extradition hearing means and how soon potentially Brian Kohberger could be back in Idaho?
the extradition hearing really does not have much to do with the substance of the case. What happens is when a person is located outside of the jurisdiction, here the defendant is in Pennsylvania, there's an Idaho warrant for his arrest. So Pennsylvania took him into custody, but he needs to be extradited from one jurisdiction to another. You know, as everything in our legal system, a person has the right to challenge, a person has the right to ask questions. So the purpose of the hearing is to give the defendant the opportunity, if he so chose, to challenge extradition. Typically, that's a non-go. Not much is going to happen. It's very infrequent to find a poor extradition. But in this case, when it comes to homicide, especially a homicide of this type, I feel like he probably should have challenged it, just because the approach is always attack, attack, attack when you're the defendant in such a case. You know, one of the big questions we have here is, why was this particular person arrested? You know, so far law enforcement has been very quiet about the basis for this arrest. And I feel that if I was representing this individual, I would not miss any opportunity to be asking questions. I don't believe in taking things at face value. He's being given this chance, and he should capitalize on it to make sure that there is justice being done here. But at the end of the day, it is about whether or not it is a valid warrant. It appears to be, and I feel that's why he probably waived any challenge.
And when you waive a challenge like this, potentially that's what we've heard from his lawyer, that he potentially will waive this extradition and be back in Idaho. How quickly does that transpire, and how maybe quickly will he be in a courtroom in Idaho if he does plan to waive this extradition?
So this is not a normal case. This is a very high-profile case with a lot of victims and a lot of victims' family. It's a case that has national attention. They're going to transport him quickly. Under normal circumstances, it can take time. You know, they say the jail bus is the slowest bus in town. And unfortunately, when a person has to get transported from one side of the country to the other, it can take a bit of time. But given the high-profile nature of this case, I expect him to be in Idaho rather quickly.
And we heard not a ton of details from the police there in Idaho. As a former prosecutor, what does that tell you? Because obviously state laws differ from state to state, but in Idaho, you mentioned the fact that there hasn't been a ton of details. How soon will those be revealed, and how maybe soon will all the defendant for Brian Koberger know those as well?
You know, this is a major issue with this case. You know, we have 4 victims that were stabbed and cut to death. Basically 4 separate crime scenes, even though they happened in one house. And it's been many, many weeks, I believe a few months actually, since we've heard anything. And law enforcement has been silent. They haven't said any details. They haven't told us the basis for this man's arrest. You know, there's mumblings about DNA, but it wasn't directly his DNA. They've been very quiet. And I got to tell you, as a trial lawyer, I find that troubling. Because usually when law enforcement has a good case against somebody, they parade around their evidence. They're the first ones, you know, for instance, in a major money seizure case, to lay out all the currency on the table. They do a big drug bust, all the drugs are on the table. You know, they get a guy dead to rights, here's the proof that we have. But in this case, this investigation has been going on for a very long time. We have not heard any details. And it's, you know, it raises a major question. What do they really have on this guy? You know, we have a small law enforcement agency that hasn't investigated a murder in, 7 years or whatever it's been. It's not like the New York Police Department is conducting this investigation. They probably have a homicide there every few hours. You know, so it begs a lot of question. Why this guy? Why someone in Pennsylvania? And the more silent they are about it, the louder the question is. And I think this defendant certainly is entitled to answers, and so is the public.
And I think the big point you brought up was also DNA in the car, 2 key pieces potentially to what the Idaho police are looking into. From your perspective, how big are those 2 pieces of evidence, from what you're looking at?
The answer is it's yet to be seen. And something the public does not understand until they become a juror in a criminal case is that not all DNA evidence is created equal, okay? Some DNA evidence is very reliable, and other DNA evidence is terribly unreliable. You know, sometimes it can pin the exact person. Other times, they're not so sure. And that assumes you have a properly collected, properly stored and properly tested sample. You know, when you have a local police department in a rural area that has very little homicide experience, it's not uncommon for them to trample on these crime scenes and conduct collection of evidence in a manner that is not forensically sound. You know, this evidence, even if it has a clear-cut answer, may end up being challenged for lack of admissibility because it became suspect. They didn't collect it properly. It was maybe, subjected to contamination, for instance. I'm not saying any of that necessarily happened in this case, but waving the banner of DNA only informs people who don't know much about DNA. It doesn't tell me anything as a trial lawyer. We definitely need to hear more detail. And again, their silence on this issue is troubling. That is a major issue. If they had this guy and the DNA was so good, then why aren't they telling us about it?
Definitely, and hopefully we'll hear from Pennsylvania police in the coming hours, so we'll take it to you here on Live Now from Fox. Another point of this case that continues to captivate a lot of people is the fact that Brian Kohberger, was a Washington State PhD student studying criminal justice and criminology. What do you make of that?
Absolutely nothing. It means nothing. You know, of course, when law enforcement builds a case against somebody, there's always going to be the element of character assassination. And typically when someone comes from a legal background, especially a criminal background, they always want to say, oh, he knows what he's doing. He knows the law. He knows this. He knows that. The truth is, he's a kid in school. He doesn't know anything. I don't care what he's studying. And unless they got more and some kind of context to put it in, so far it means nothing. Now, what it will mean in the end, that's yet to be seen. It could have value. You know, maybe there is something to it. But at this juncture, we shouldn't hang our hat on something so distant. You know, I want to see much harder, clear evidence than something like that.
A lot of questions still unanswered in this case that dates back to November 13th. Thank you again, former prosecutor here joining us on Live Now from Fox, Brian Silver. We appreciate your time. Any parting thoughts you want to leave with our audience about this case?
Keep your mind open. The man is innocent until proven guilty. And remember this, a conviction is only good if they get the right guy. And if the evidence isn't there, that means that the real person or people who are involved in this could still be out there. It's not about walking someone, as they say. It's about getting a good conviction and a right conviction.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. That was some great perspective as we're still following this case very intently here on Live Now from Fox. We appreciate it. Well, we're going to continue on here on Live Now from Fox as the judge ordering that extradition for the accused Idaho murder suspect Brian Kohberger. He waived that extradition on Tuesday in a Pennsylvania courtroom and will be brought to Moscow to face murder charges for the deaths of those 4 college students. Kohberger entered the Monroe County courtroom in a red jail jumpsuit and looked directly at his parents and sisters who were seated together in the front row of the gallery. There needs to be a 10-day period as he will head back to Moscow, Idaho, potentially to face these 4 counts of first-degree murder, and we will hear more about the arrest affidavit that the Idaho police have that we don't really know a ton of details for here on Live Now from Fox. We're following all of these things as we just heard from officials in Monroe County. We're going to take a quick 2-minute break.